Hail and well met, brave adventurers. My name is DM Bob Yo, and welcome to Monday Minutes with the DM. I just want to thank everyone that's coming here today. I want to ask you to make sure and subscribe, hit my links, go visit my website, sign up to play games with me, and all that stuff. All the links, right down below in the video description. But let's just get right into it. So this week, I had some fun times playing D&D with both friends as well as clients. So one of my most memorable things about this week was on Saturday, I'm running the Waterdeep Dragon Heist adventure for a group, actually for two separate groups, one on Fridays, one on Saturday, and I do have an opening on my Friday game, so if you're interested in that, make sure and hit my profile at startplaying.games. But for the Saturday group, we did kind of a little side quest, and they wound up in some caverns and faced off against a couple of creatures. One of the most interesting creatures that they faced off against this week was a flail snail. Now, those of you who've been playing D&D for a long time will remember back in the early days, we had lots of creatures like the flail snail. Now, just to tell you what it is, a flail snail it's very big, large, right? It's 10 feet tall and 10 feet wide, and it's got it looks like a snail, but instead of one big thing with sort of tentacles, there's four of them or five of them to start out with, and these tentacles have flails on the end of them. He hits with them, and sort of a. And he has an anti-magic shell, so when you cast spells on him, there's a chance that spell is going to basically bounce back at you. And the shells are very valuable because they can be used to create a couple different magic items, robe of scintillating colors, as well as an anti-magic shield. Anyway, but it's kind of one of those tongue-in-cheek creatures from the old, harkens back to the old days of D&D, like the Flumph. Some of you will remember the Flumph, and of course the giant space hamsters. And I was talking with some of my players from that session in a chat during the week, and we were reminiscing about some of those types of fun monsters from the old days of D&D. And that's always been one thing that D&D has had compared to a lot of the other fantasy RPGs. It's had some of those sort of tongue-in-cheek, interesting, funny creatures. I also, this was my on week to play with my group of friends, and so Wednesday night I got to take them. They are playing a faction in my Obsidian Shards campaign. Most of my Obsidian Shards campaign runs the Voices of Emiriel. So if you've played in my OS 1 or OS 2 or any of my OS adventures, my one-shot Obsidian Shards adventures on startplaying.games, those are all Voices of Emiriel, that particular faction. Well, these folks are a different faction, and but these are my guys from like the late 2000s and early 2010s. I met for the most part, most of them, all but one, at a local gaming store playing D&D Encounters at that time, and that was back during the 4E days, and which has got me reminiscing a lot in some ways this week too. We're talking about, I mentioned older editions and tongue-in-cheek monsters and things, and one of the things that sort of also kind of reoccurs in D&D seems to be edition wars. I remember when 3rd edition came out, I was pretty opposed to switching, but I was talked into it by some new friends, and I enjoyed 3rd edition for a long time. And then, but when 4th edition came out, of course, there were pretty severe reaction against that from a lot of folks, and I think a lot of it was marketing and some other factors. But regardless, the fact is, today the community is more or less unified. There are folks that won't play D&D at all, and certainly there are folks that prefer, let's say, Pathfinder or Pathfinder 2 to Dungeons and Dragons, but for the most part, not too many folks are poo-pooing on D&D 5e, which is a good feeling. It's nice to not be in the middle of an edition war any longer. Also got to run one of my more advanced adventures in Obsidian Shards with some clients, and that was nice because I like those because they're one shots, but they bring back players that you haven't played with maybe in a few weeks, and in some cases players that have never played together. It's almost like playing Adventurers League, I suppose, or playing at a convention. And for me as a DM, those are especially fun to watch the dynamics of players that may or may not interact with each other on a regular basis. Also this week, I did on Friday, I believe it was, March 12th, there is a video. You might be interested in looking if you've ever struggled with getting comfortable with the idea of role-playing, of acting in character. I think that's a good video to watch. To kind of summarize some of the thoughts there, I want to just reiterate that not everybody enjoys the role-playing part of D&D, just like not everybody enjoys the combat or puzzles or whatnot. And I think the fact of the matter is that D&D is a diverse community, and I think that's part of what makes D&D great, and D&D games great is just a variety of perspectives and views. All right, so another thing I want to talk about today, just sort of briefly, is my experience with virtual tabletops. Now, my experience is my own, and certainly not reflective of anybody else's. And I say that because I got into a discussion among the dungeon masters over at startplaying.games about what virtual tabletop everybody likes. And I asked, those of you who played with me know that I like Fantasy Grounds. I've used Fantasy Grounds for quite a while. When I started DMing more and more online, I considered switching to Roll20. I did some DMing on Roll20, and for me personally, it was more complex, a more significant barrier to entry in terms of the learning curve. And so, and I looked at Foundry, and I felt the same thing, although Foundry had more to offer, I think, than Roll20 in the way of features. But Fantasy Grounds, there's a bit of a learning curve, but I find that my players that play in my new D&D sessions, my new player session, and then they start in OS1, Obsidian Shards 1, Shardstorm. They play that one on Fantasy Grounds, and I feel like walking them through for about 10 minutes, walking them through the character sheet and helping them find everything and learn the Fantasy Grounds interface really makes a huge difference. So, if you're looking for a virtual tabletop, I can't recommend Fantasy Grounds enough. The other thing that Fantasy Grounds offers, and even critics will tell you this, it offers a great deal of automation. You can, there's much built in the way of all of your spells and your effects and really just all of those sorts of things, and lots of options in terms of the tactical rules of D&D 5th edition that it will automatically implement. So, which I very much like. So, again, I'm not suggesting that you shy away from any virtual tabletop, but if you haven't tried Fantasy Grounds, and if you're thinking about what one might be good for your group, I recommend at least trying Roll20 as well, and perhaps Foundry, but I do think, for me, Fantasy Grounds really seems to be the way to go. So I want to also offer another thought for newer players and newer groups. If you've got a newer group, and one of you, of course, is the DM, something you might not be aware of is on D&D Beyond, you can set up a campaign, and the way that works is you invite your players into a campaign, and up to 12 players can participate in a given campaign. And right now, during the pandemic with COVID and whatnot, they now allow DMs to have participate in 5 campaigns. And what you can do is called content sharing. And so you can basically take all of the books that you purchased for D&D Beyond, and your players can all have access to all the different options, the magic items, the classes, the races, the feats, all of those things. So for example, with my ongoing campaigns that I run, and I've got 2 Princes of the Apocalypse campaigns starting this week. If you're interested in those, go to dmbobyo.com. One is Thursday evenings, 8 p.m. I believe it is Eastern time, but you'll want to again check the website. And then I've got one at 11 a.m. Eastern time on Fridays if a daytime game works for you. But anyway, my point being, with ongoing players, with players that I have week after week, I give them access to one of my campaigns on D&D Beyond, and I've purchased all of the player assets, all the player options. So basically everything from every D&D book, when they make their characters, they have access to that. And then I just am able to import their characters into Fantasy Grounds using a website called beyond2fgconvert.com. And anyway, if you're a new DM, new players, I would highly recommend, as a group, investing in content. And once a campaign has content sharing enabled, any content owned by a member of the group is shared. So it could be that the DM perhaps has bought the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster Manual, and the players maybe have bought, one of them has bought the Player's Handbook. Perhaps one of them has bought Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and maybe another one, who also DMs sometimes, has bought Volo's Guide to Monsters or something. You can also, on D&D Beyond, you can also gift purchases to your DM or another person. So, back in the old days, it was always a matter of the DM, generally anyway, the DM buying all the books and bringing them to the games. And, I never really minded that per se, but I always enjoyed it when a player purchased one for me too. So that's kind of neat that that's now again an option with the virtual content on D&D Beyond. All right, so, that'll wrap it up, I think, for today, for another Monday Minute with the DM. Again, my name's DM Bob Yo. You can find me all over the internet, social media. Facebook in particular is kind of where I spend most of my social media time. But obviously, you can check me out on Twitter. And again, visit my website, dmbobyo.com, and sign up for those sessions of Princes of the Apocalypse that are starting this week. And I'm also running a one-shot of Candlekeep Mysteries, the new book that comes out Wednesday. I'm running a one-shot of Candlekeep, so feel free to sign up for that one-shot event as well. If you're interested in other games, go visit me on startplaying.games. I'm currently the highest rated DM on the site, so I'm not too hard to find. And to all my players and all my followers, thank you. I appreciate your time and your commitment. And I will see you all out in the world.